From the campus of Utah Tech University in St. George, the Utah Debate Commission welcomes you to the 2nd Congressional District Candidates Debate.
Welcome. I'm Max Roth, moderator for this evening, and on behalf of the Utah Debate Commission, we're pleased to come to you tonight from Utah Tech University's Eccles Fine Arts Center. We're hearing from 2 candidates who have met the qualifications for this debate. The candidates are Celeste Malloy and Nathaniel Woodward. We're looking forward to a lively and a civil debate with the goal of giving Utah voters first-hand exposure to candidates and good information for decision-making. If you'd like to participate via social media, we encourage your comments. Use the hashtag UTDebates on social media. A random drawing held prior to the debate determined that candidate Woodward will get the initial response to the first question. We will then alternate turns on the remaining questions throughout the debate. And it's time to begin. And the first question, I hope, is an easy one. We want to get to know you. What should a voter know about you, Mr. Woodward? And before they cast their ballot, what would you like them to know?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Representative Malloy, for sharing this stage with me today. What I believe a voter needs to know about me personally is that there's not a lot to know about me. I am thoroughly an average person. I'm not special as I was extra gifted in school or I've gone too far in my career due to my own strengths or abilities. I am me, a boy from Price, who's always been a boy from Price and who always will be a boy from Price. I am normal. I like to live my normal life, sit in my garden, read a book, go to work, argue with the PTA, and enjoy activities in my small town with my children. That's who I am. Now, what can I be is a question we should all consider for ourselves. As a boy from coal country, to stand on this stage is a remarkable thing for me to think of. And I believe that's who you should know about me, is that I don't know if I belong here, but I'm happy I am.
And that is time. Thank you so much for that answer. Same question to you, Ms. Malloy. What should a voter know about you before they cast their ballot?
Well, the number one thing I hope the voters know about me before they go vote for me is that being here representing them is the honor and privilege of my lifetime up to this point. It's not something that I expected to do, but it's something I have thoroughly enjoyed doing. I am a problem solver. I like listening to people, hearing their problems and addressing them, and this job is the ultimate problem-solving job. When it's done well, it requires a lot of travel, a lot of listening, and a lot of empathy. It's a job that you can't do without your heart and your brain, and I have spent the last 10 months in Congress using as much of my heart and my brain as I can to serve the people of the 2nd District, and I look forward to having an opportunity to serve them through a full term in Congress.
All right. And Ms. Malloy, the next question goes to you first, and you'll have a minute to answer this question about water. Utah's rapid population growth and agricultural demands strain our limited water resources. Now, as a member of Congress, how will you work with federal, state, and local entities to craft innovative water policies?
Well, Utah's already being innovative about water policy, so that's the first thing I want everybody to understand. My job as a federal representative is to support the state. The state of Utah is on the cutting edge of water reuse and conservation and making sure that the limited water supplies we have here in the state go as far as they can. And that is the level of government that should be doing that. Water is in the state's jurisdiction. As a member of the federal delegation, I am part of the Colorado River Caucus, and part of the reason that I joined that caucus is to make sure that Congress doesn't get involved where we shouldn't be and step on the state's toes while the states are being innovative and making sure they provide clean, safe drinking water to the residents of Utah. So I'm supporting the state, making sure my colleagues are educated on Utah's needs and that we're being innovative in our water, and I look forward to seeing the population of Utah continue to grow and have drinking water as we innovate and use the water the best we can.
Mr. Woodward, same question. How would you support innovative water policies?
It's important to recognize that water is one of the most complicated issues that's going to be affecting us in the near future and for decades to come. If you look at the firms, the investment firms out of New York and California that predicted the 2008 housing market crash, they're currently investing heavily in water and water shares. Living in Price, I understand the issues that the mega drought has brought. We have had to ration water for many, many years. In addition to, we have to be good neighbors to those downstream from us. Now, in the coming years, we don't know how much rainfall or snowpack we're going to get. But we need to be able to not just hedge our bets, but be proactive on how we're going to regulate what we do with the water that falls here and then moves on to our neighbors down the river. We need to look at solutions that involve the federal government getting involved with Southern California, building desalination plants, and then trading back us those water rights in order for us to sustain ourselves in the near future.
We want to stick with land and water issues for a moment, so this is still going to go first to Ms. Malloy. This question about public lands. The state of Utah is funding advertisements that take a stand on one side of an issue that really does divide Utahns. The effort is called Stand for Our Lands, asking residents to support the state's lawsuit to gain control of much of the land that's currently under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Land Management. Do you support that state effort, and if so, why?
I do support the state's effort. I think it's a really thoughtful effort, and I think they're asking the right question. So the state filed a lawsuit with the Supreme Court asking the right question, and that question is, should the federal government be able to hold land in perpetuity that hasn't been designated to a specific use? And I think it's fair to ask the Supreme Court to answer that question. If the Constitution's charge to the federal government to dispose of public land means they can hold on to public land, then we need to know the answer. Can they do that in perpetuity? And Utah isn't the only state that needs an answer to that question. And I think in the past we've jumped to the remedy too soon and asked for a specific remedy before we answered that question. I think Utah's being thoughtful and careful, and I support what they're doing because we do need an answer to that question. Is it going to be this way forever, or is the federal government going to dispose of that land at some point?
All right. And Mr. Woodward, your thoughts on Stand for Our Lands?
I am hesitant to fully get on board with any type of lawsuit that goes against the federal government with this type of rhetoric. Now, I do support the notion and the idea of transferring back a significant portion of this federally owned land to state control. Now, I live in Carbon and Emery counties. Over 90% of these two counties are owned by the BLM or other federal organizations or departments. What's important to understand here is when people say our public lands, they need to know that some of us actually live on them. And so what happens there is much more impactful than just what we do with it. And so my hesitancy with this lawsuit is the people who are bringing it. The vast majority of the lawmakers in the state are either developers themselves or in bed with those same companies and funders. And so I would like to see this act led by people who live on the public lands, and we transfer those public lands not just back to the state, but to the SITLA program.
That is time. Before we get to our next student question, I did want to follow up because neither of you addressed the part of the question about the state advertising to residents, to citizens, to support the state's place in this lawsuit. Is that an appropriate thing for a government entity to do?
Are you starting with me?
Yes, I'm asking you first, Ms. Malloy. 15 seconds or 30 seconds at the most.
I do think it's an appropriate use of state dollars, if that's what you're asking. The state filed a lawsuit. This is something that is unprecedented in asking this question, and the people of Utah have a right to know what the state's doing. And the fact that they're being proactive about informing residents in Utah about what they're doing so that they're not just getting it from headlines, I think is a wise stewardship on the part of the state, and I do support it.
Mr. Woodward?
I'm going to once again somewhat hedge on my answer, and I do support it, but I'm hesitant to fully support it because it is so biased. It's coming with too much of the fluff and not enough of the neutral standpoint. You have to advertise it so people will watch it, of course, but I'm more worried about the use of taxpayer dollars to sell an agenda in a way that doesn't fully address what's actually happening.
All right, now we're going to turn to a student here from Utah Tech, Carson.
Visit the idea of manifest destiny, to reopen the Homestead Act, We have lots of federal public land available. That is not necessarily the public lands you're thinking of when you think of the advertisings. There's lots of space to grow and build new towns. So what better way to address inflation than to create more cities in which to house people and to build and construct and to expand. This goes back to the water issue, where we could build those desalination plants in Southern California, make a whole federal program of this, and let the newer generations, the Gen Z and the millennials who've been priced out of the market, literally go and manifest our own destiny. I think that's something my generation, and hopefully your generation, will find appealing and something we can really sink our teeth into and define who we are for ourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Woodward. Ms. Malloy?
That's a great question. Utah's a wonderful place to live. A lot of people are moving here, but if we want it to stay a wonderful place to live, young people have to be able to afford to stay here. Most of the policy inputs to housing affordability are state and local inputs, and as a member of the federal delegation, I try to stay out of their lane. But there are things that we can do and that I am doing at the federal level to make that easier. For example, as a member of the House of Representatives, I voted against large spending bills that are outside of the appropriations process. When the federal government pumps a lot of dollars into the economy, it causes inflation. So that's one of the things I'm doing to fight inflation. I've also introduced permitting reform bills and other bills that simplify federal government processes so that we're not artificially inflating the prices of energy, power, and the building blocks of houses to make the end product, the home, more expensive. Those are things that we are doing at the federal level to support the efforts at the local level.
Thank you.
All right, you got your answers, Carson? Great, thank you. This is going to go to Ms. Malloy first, and it is related. We're going to be talking about debt reduction, but we also want to talk about seniors. Carson was talking about students and young people, but seniors often live on fixed incomes. And so when we talk about debt reduction, experts on the debt say that in order to actually reduce it, you'd have to cut defense, Social Security, Medicare, and other mandatory spending, or increase taxes. So what do you do? Which of those is palatable to you?
So just to be clear, we should not be cutting defense spending right now. The world is a dangerous place. The only way for us to have peace is for America to be strong. But we do have to address mandatory spending. And that's something that I've been willing to take on since I first started running. I've been talking to my colleagues in the House about innovative plans. We don't have one that's ready to roll out yet. I don't have a 3-point plan to present here today. But I am willing to take on mandatory spending, and that's a change from where Congress has been in the past. And I think part of the reason we can have that conversation now is that seniors are also willing to have the conversation. In the past, it's been the third rail of politics. Seniors didn't want to talk about it, and it's going to take all of us. We're all going to have skin in the game to fix debt and deficit spending. And so I appreciate that the generation that came before me is now willing to say we can't keep going the way we're going. We're headed towards a disaster. Let's look at mandatory spending and find ways to fix it that don't harm people who are already on a fixed income and dependent on government programs. I think there are a lot of good answers out there. We just need to put them together into a package.
All right, and Mr. Woodward.
I'm going to take a completely opposite approach to this and say that we absolutely have to reduce our defense spending. The Pentagon has yet to pass an audit. I can't remember the last time if they passed one at all. There needs to be consequences for agencies and organizations who spend our taxpayer dollars and don't actually account for what they're doing. I do agree that for a safe world, America does need to be strong, but I would take that a little bit further, saying that we don't just need strength, we need intelligence. We need to be able to operate in this world without waving a big stick, without the threat of invasion or us funding some other country's war. We need to be smarter and more compassionate with our money, and we need to hold those who are spending it more accountable for it, to the degree that if these departments or agencies do not pass an audit, the accountability has to be there, whether they have to clean house with their staff or we have to revisit whether that organization or department should even exist any longer.
All right, and I think the next question from student Ben Johnson here is going to be addressed to Mr. Woodward first, and it is, you've teed this up nicely, both of you.
Thank you for taking my question. What is your stance on U.S. military aid to Israel and the Ukraine? What restrictions, if any, should come with this aid?
Once again, very hard thing to get out in just a soundbite amount of time here. War and conflict are complicated and also can be very simple as well. We know Russia's motivations in Ukraine, while in the Middle East, those motivations for those different states and their interaction with each other are, I think, a little less simple. And so we can't approach both of those situations the same way. We need to look at the context of that situation. So with the Ukraine matter with Russia, we need to take into account that there are several other allies in the area who need to stand up and be the strength that we've been behind that for a while now, but also recognizing that we do have skin in that game as well, and we need to make sure the people of Ukraine are safe. When it comes to the conflict in the Middle East right now, the biggest thing I want to advocate for is compassion and empathy. We have a tremendous amount of civilians, children, men, women, who have nothing to do with this conflict other than they live there, and they are the ones suffering. And we need to make sure that our allies, like Israel, are not being flippant and wanton with their attacks, saying that there's acceptable losses. We need to get to the point where acceptable losses do not include the death of children in any way, shape, or form. We have to be more surgical with this effort with Israel and help rein in their aggression while they need to protect themselves from several aggressors. We owe them both of those things.
Thank you, Mr. Woodward. And Ms. Malloy, same question.
Well, I do find myself in agreement with my opponent in that we need to treat those two conflicts differently, that our responsibility in each of them is different. And I think we've made a mistake often in Congress or in public discourse by lumping them together. So Ukraine, I was there in August, and it is inspiring to be on the ground and see how the people of Ukraine are willing to fight and defend their freedom. And I think that is good and appropriate, and we should be supporting them. The question is, how should we be supporting them? And until we have better accountability and a better argument from them for dollars, I support sending them weapons and artillery and supporting them in other ways, but not sending cash. With Israel, they are our closest ally in the Middle East. We share intel with them, and they are fighting a proxy war that will come to our shores if they don't win. They're fighting Iran's terrorist proxies, and they've done an incredible job recently of taking out terrorists who are on our terrorist watch list, people we had bounties on. It's really easy to draw the line from what Israel's doing to what we need done, and we have to support Israel. I was in downtown Salt Lake City today, and I saw a pro-Hamas display in downtown Salt Lake City, and it said, it had pictures and said these people were murdered by Israel, and I thought that is a really narrow way of looking at a country that is besieged on all sides, defending itself. We have to be really careful. We are the world superpower, and the things we say have an impact on the world stage.
Thank you. And Ben,
Thanks.
Thank you. Our next question comes from social media. We invited questioners to send in possible questions. This comes from Travis Vallejo on the platform X. And he asks, what will you do in Washington to help keep the quality of life at a high level in your district and the extremely fast-growing southern Utah area where we stand now? Ms. Malloy.
Well, thank you for that question. I also live in southern Utah, so this matters a lot to me. The thing I'm going to do and am already doing is fighting back government overreach. Almost every problem my constituents talk to me about is really a matter of the government getting involved in things it shouldn't be getting involved in or overreaching its authority. This summer, the Supreme Court overturned the Chevron case. And for those of you who are not law nerds, what that means is that agencies have less deference. For the last 40 years, they've been writing, interpreting, and enforcing rules that then have the effect of a law. But they haven't gone through Congress. The people who write them are not accountable to you. They don't come to Utah and talk to my constituents and ask how this is going to impact you. The reason Congress should be making those decisions is because I do things like this. I come stand here and account to my constituents for what I'm doing. So I'm working with my colleagues to dismantle the administrative state and make a smaller, more accountable federal government.
All right. Thanks, Ms. Malloy. And Mr. Woodward, the question about ensuring quality of life in Utah, specifically southern Utah.
It's important to put in the hard work when you realize that every community in this entire district or in this state in general is very different and unique. Now, I live and grew up in Price, a town that was equal parts LDS, Catholic, and Greek. It was a remarkable place to see these different cultures interact. Our quality of life was different than that of someone in Cedar City or Kanab or Bountiful. And so we need to be able to recognize that individual cultures exist in these communities and go to them and ask them, what quality of life are you concerned about? Is there a certain aspect of the economy or the culture that you think needs boosting or protection or insight of ours in any way, and then taking that insight back to Congress and finding the resources that they need to bring home? It should be a ground-up approach. And I agree with Representative Malloy in regards to us practicing a little bit better federalism, where our states have a little bit more determination on what happens within them.
All right, we're going to move on to another issue. This question going to Mr. Woodward first. One of the most important issues to voters this year is immigration. Now, most Utahns weren't born when the last major immigration reform passed Congress. A comprehensive negotiated bipartisan reform package was defeated earlier this year. So in a closely divided Congress, what do you see as essential for immigration reform, and where can you see reasonable compromise?
Unfortunately, Congress has proven it is not capable of addressing this problem. It's shown that these big problems are just beyond its ability to get along and to come to solutions. Now, we're sitting here on the campus that is 2 blocks away from a cemetery where my 3-times great-grandma, Sophia Rausch, is buried. She was one of the first female doctors in the world and came over to Utah in the 1870s. She came down to St. George, gave birth to a child, and left her polygamous husband because she wanted to go out and heal people. She came through the immigration process as it existed back then. Today, it's much more complicated, it's much more intrusive, it's much more in the way. And we get all caught up in our own minds thinking that these people are cheating the system, that they're illegal or somehow not welcome here. And I think as a people, we need to get a grip on the reality that our compassion needs to be worked on. It's easy to get angry. It's lazy to get angry. It takes hard work to be empathetic. We should be welcoming people in and trying to help them establish themselves here as our ancestors did.
And Ms. Malloy, same question. What's essential in immigration reform to you, and what could you compromise?
So the first thing we have to do on immigration is get our border under control. There is no immigration reform that's going to help solve the problem as long as our border is wide open. The good news on that is that the House passed H.R. 2, so we have a plan on immigration. The other good news is that the executive branch has all the tools it needs to get the border under control. We have a side-by-side comparison right now. 4 years ago, we had a controlled border. Now we don't. The laws have not changed. What's changed is the political will to enforce the law. So while Congress needs to act, we can solve a lot of the problem without any action from Congress. Once we have the border under control, then we can address the immigration process. It is onerous. It is outdated. I meet all the time with Utah businesses that need to have a more streamlined process for getting workers. We can solve both of those problems, but we've got to start with the border.
Okay. This next question goes to you first, Ms. Malloy, and we're talking about tariffs now. President Trump imposed tariffs on Chinese goods coming into our country. They're largely still in place. Now, he says he wants to turbocharge that policy if elected, saying tariffs are a win-win, and he wants it to be even more international, while there will be a specific focus to China. Charging foreign entities, he says, benefits American workers. Now, most economists say the cost of tariffs are passed on to consumers. So what do you think about that question? What is the role of tariffs, and are they worth it if it causes costs to rise for the rest of us?
So once again, this is an issue where we have a side-by-side comparison. During the Trump administration, we imposed tariffs on Iran and China, and we didn't have wars in the Middle East, and China wasn't conducting military exercises around Taiwan like they've done this week. We're a free trade country, and I want to see us have free trade, but we have actors on the world stage who are not playing by the rules. And we've used economic sanctions to force them to play by the rules. in the past. For the last 3.5 years, we haven't enforced those sanctions, and now Iran is once again funding terrorist organizations. There's a war going on in the Middle East, and China is emboldened, as evidenced by their military exercises they're doing right now. So I support a plan where we use economic sanctions to keep the world a safe place and keep bad actors on the world stage from being emboldened to attack their neighbors and endanger our way of life.
Mr. Woodward, the question is about tariffs.
Former President Trump's views on tariffs are immature and uninformed. If you look back, not that far back in our history, pre-World War II just, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, you can see what our international policy led Japan to do to us at Pearl Harbor. Now, if we want to take this isolationist approach where we can just say we're going to make everything expensive from other countries, we're going to be in a very similar state and give other countries more justifications to treat us similarly or worse. Now, that would be the case if a tariff could affect any part of this economy right now in a positive way, but that's not the issue. The biggest issue that's happening to American workers is not the Chinese corporations, it's not the European corporations or any other corporations from outside of our country. It's the American corporations who are putting the business elsewhere, putting their manufacturing elsewhere, and then bringing the product back here. They want to benefit from the cheap labor of elsewhere, but not pay any fair share here on their own.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Woodward. And this next question goes to you. First, we're talking about the Congress and the situation that you would be moving into. If elected, you'd be part of either a very narrow majority or minority in a closely divided House. Now, how would you take on the responsibility of the importance of your votes, which are magnified? An individual can have sway if they move one way or another. So how do you take that on in a closely divided Congress to benefit Utah's 2nd District?
I think it's time for a rural person to be in Congress from Utah. Now, I mean rural as in rural. If your town has an Applebee's, I have a hard time accepting you as rural. But where I come from is where I used to play with my neighborhood friends. And when I played with them, if you lost and took your ball and went home, you weren't invited to come back and play the next time. And that's what's going on in Congress right now, is both sides are not willing to play with each other. And if they're not going to get the win, they're going to take their ball and go home. And that is a tremendously disappointing thing for adults in a leadership role to be doing. And so going to Congress, I'm going to have to be a little bit of that Carbon County boy where I'm not going to put up with that kind of play. And if you're not going to play the game with the rest of us, I don't want you to play anymore. I want those who are not willing to step across the aisle and say, hey, this is a good idea. It benefits the people. Let's do this, or I support this. And if your answer is no to that because of politics, I don't know what role you have there.
That is time. Ms. Malloy, I could give you 15 extra seconds to defend Applebee's in Cedar City. I imagine that was directed towards you.
I'll let that one slide.
I don't know if that's necessary, but the question is about using that sway and being in a House that's so closely divided.
Yeah, I don't have to use very much imagination to know what I would do in a closely divided House. I've spent most of the last year serving in a very closely divided House. The night I was sworn in as a member of Congress, a little less than a year ago, I said that I'm excited to serve at a time when one person can make such a big difference. And that is the result of a closely divided House. You asked what responsibility that gives me when I vote, and you don't have to wonder about that. You don't have to use any imagination. I've already demonstrated what I will do. I vote, and then I come back and I explain my votes. I put out videos. I have a weekly newsletter. If you're not getting my newsletter, go to my website and sign up for it. I explain to my constituents why I'm voting, because I'm voting on behalf of the people in the 2nd District. It's not my vote. It's our vote. And I put a lot of time and thought into those votes, and then I come back and explain to them and account to the people I represent for what I'm doing. And almost everything I've done so far has been bipartisan because I owe it to my constituents to do things that will work and make their lives better.
Thank you for that. Now, we've reached a midpoint, halfway point of the debate featuring candidates for Utah's 2nd Congressional District. Those participating in tonight's debate are Celeste Malloy and Nathaniel Woodward. And once again, I'm Max Roth. We encourage your comments. You can use the hashtag UTDebates on social media. And let's get back to the questions. This next question starts with Ms. Malloy. We've seen very large bills covering an array of issues. You've talked about omnibus bills, both budget and issue bills in Congress. If you agree with the majority of the policies in a bill, but you disagree with other portions, do you vote against it? Do you vote in support as a compromise? Where is the line?
That is a really fair question, and the answer is it depends, and that's the only fair answer. I have voted on several of these bills where I agree with almost everything in the bill, but there are a few things I don't like. And sometimes I've voted yes, sometimes I've voted no, because it takes an understanding of what's in the bill and how that's going to impact the people in the 2nd District. If the objectionable parts of the bill are things that are going to harm my constituents, then I have to vote no, even if I agree with the majority of the bill. I've said that there are 3 filters all my votes go through. Is this something Congress should be doing? Do we have the constitutional authority to do it? Will it make Americans more free? And is it good for the people of the 2nd District? And that's how I make those decisions on every bill. Sometimes I agree with the majority of the bill, and there are some objectionable things in there that don't outweigh the good that the bill would do, and sometimes it's the other way around, and I have to make that decision on an individual basis with every bill I vote on.
Ms. Malloy, thank you. Mr. Woodward, the question is about compromise. Where do you draw the line with a bill that contains things you like and don't like?
I like that lawyer answer of it depends. It's a daily go-to for me. And I would treat this similarly how I run my practice, especially when handling divorces. When me and another attorney are breaking up a marriage, it is difficult, and it should be difficult. Even in the best situations, it should be carefully thought out. And a conversation I have often with my clients is, what are you willing to pay to make this go away now, just so I know? That way, there's going to be some give, there's going to be some take. It's incredibly important to understand you're not going to get your way 100% of the time. And so in Congress, that's an important thing to consider. Is this bill good for the people? I think my 3-step is a 1-step. Is it good for the people? I'm not big on the semantics of the flag-waving choreographed patriotism we see a lot, where people who like to make a show of it. I'm not that person. So is it good for the people? Let's move forward with it. And if there's some bad stuff in there, it really depends on what that is and whether we can make it acceptable for us or not.
That is time. By the way, I do want to apologize. Someone turned your light off in the middle of that answer. I don't know who it is, but we'll have some kind of inquiry after the debate.
They probably work at Applebee's in Cedar City.
It's probably easier in everyone's eyes. It's fine.
Hardly. Okay, so this next question goes to you, Mr. Woodward, first. Do you believe incivility is a problem in American politics today? And if so, what would you do to increase civility in the public square?
To increase it, I suggest you run against Celeste Malloy. It is a problem. It is a major problem. Having some shred of decorum in our adult lives seems like an effort now when it was just expected of us. We need to be able to not just disagree better, as Governor Cox has said, but disagree much better. We should encourage a dialogue, a wide array of thought. Even sometimes those thoughts are honestly terrible. Sometimes, I have that conversation with my 12-year-old daughter. They go, that is an inside-your-head thought that shouldn't come out. And as adults, if those do come out, we need to give each other a little bit more grace and learning room to grow. Because if I was held fully accountable for every opinion I've ever said, I would not be standing here today. In fact, I'm standing here today because the person who had this position before me did not stand his ground with his terrible ideas, and now I had to come here with a few of my own.
And that is time. I do want to ask for a clarification. You made a joke at the top, and I think it might have been a compliment, but I wasn't quite sure if I was hearing it right. About running against Ms. Malloy.
Yeah, it was not a joke at all. I said if they want to understand how to civilly run, I suggest you run against Celeste because she is civil by definition.
I just wanted to know before I gave you 30 seconds rebuttal time because I thought that's what he meant, but I wasn't sure.
I don't want to rebut
Ms.
that.
Malloy, the question, is incivility a problem, and if so, what do you do?
Incivility is a problem. Disagreement is not. And I've quoted my mother a lot since I got into politics, because it turns out she is really smart about how to get along with people. And when I was young, she would tell me all the time, you can't control anybody but yourself. And so in my time in politics, I have really lived that. When other people are incivil, I choose to be civil. And I hope that that invites civility in return. What I don't do is agree with everything everybody says. When we can have robust disagreements, we get better ideas. If everybody goes along all the time, then bad ideas are going to get through. And I think sometimes people confuse civility and just going along to get along. And what I try to do personally, for me, is model being able to disagree with people when I think they're wrong in a civil way, and invite that in return, so that we can get to better answers, so that we can get to better policy, so we're serving the people well instead of just yelling and turning people off from being involved.
All right. And we're going to start this next question with you, Ms. Malloy. The U.S. Supreme Court, this is about abortion. The U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade with the Dobbs decision, allowing states to restrict abortion if they choose. Utah does have an abortion law that's currently on hold by the courts. If it goes into effect, it bans nearly all abortions. Our history in this country is marked by moments when we decided that rights were either too fundamental or not for a state border to change what those rights are. The right to vote and the right to marry come to mind. Now, is abortion, does it fall into that category? And if not, how is it different?
Well, I am unapologetically pro-life. I think the right that falls into that category is the right to life. And the Dobbs decision said that there is no right to an abortion. That was the question that was decided in Dobbs. Roe v. Wade incorrectly decided that by saying the Constitution, by penumbras, contained a right to abortion. The Supreme Court just corrected itself, kicked it back to the states to make that decision, and that is the right way for it to be done. So I support the states making that decision on a state-by-state basis. In a federal system like we have to have a tolerance for differences between the states. That's how we get the experimentation that gets us to good answers.
Mr. Woodward.
I believe the entirety of the abortion debate begins and ends with that I am not a woman, and it is not my place to tell a woman what she is allowed to do with her body or not. Now, there are obviously other concerns when it comes to a fetus. At what point is that fetus considered a human life? And that is a conversation I think that we should have much more thoroughly in a much more civil dialogue. However, I'm always going to err on the side of individual choice. I have a daughter, and the idea that she may be denied elective or even life-saving treatment based on some guy looking like me's viewpoints is sickening to me. And I think it's not just sickening, but it's a pathetic use of power in order to spend their amount of time in legislative bodies discussing this between men. This is a woman's discussion that should be led by them. I should not be being asked what I would do. I would listen, is what I would do.
I'd like to follow up, Ms. Malloy, with a clarification, because as you were answering, you mentioned you're pro-life, and that would be the right that you would want to protect. In the course of answering that particular question, that would mean that you think that that right should not change across state borders. So why is it that, are you saying that you think that the country should be pro-life because it's that important?
Well, I would love to see the whole country be pro-life, but I support the ability of states to pass their laws, and some states are going to come to different conclusions than Utah did. I'm a resident of Utah. I love that Utah has a very strict abortion law. Other states are going to come up with different answers, and that's part of being a nation that's made up of 50 individual states, where the states are the petri dishes, and they try out policies and see how they work and learn from each other. I hope they learn from Utah and decide to protect the right of life.
And Mr. Woodward, how would you respond to that?
I'm also from Utah, and I believe I hold every Utah sensibility that there is. And that sensibility includes a person's ability to decide for themselves what's best. Growing up in Carbon County, we learned from an early age when Norm Bangerter used to say, as far as I'm concerned, Utah ends at Provo, we'd go, thank you, we agree. We are individualistic. That was instilled upon me by my own state, and I feel it's a disservice to act any differently when it comes to incredibly important decisions, including health care.
All right. Next question starts with you, Mr. Woodward, and this will be a 1-minute response. Should members of Congress be required to publicly state the names of companies they have invested in? And if so, why?
Absolutely. It's one of the things I actually enjoy about federal practice in court is that you have to file disclosures about every corporation that is attached to your client. That way the judge, who federal judges tend to be a little bit more wealthy, can see whether they have a conflict of interest or not. That conflict of interest is incredibly important when it comes to the practice of law, because we need to make sure we're making decisions that are unbiased. It's even more important when we're going into legislative bodies. We should have to disclose exactly where our money is coming from, where our interests are. You see this gross amount of wealth that people in Congress are accumulating over their time there that makes no sense on how they're allowed to do that while people in private practice get thrown in prison for it. And so, yes, disclosure should be absolutely required. In fact, if we have any campaign finance reform laws in the works right now, I would heavily suggest that become part of it before you're allowed to take office.
Ms. Malloy.
I am all in favor of transparency when you're in public office. As a member of Congress, I do have to disclose all of my investments. If you go look mine up, you're going to see that I'm not fabulously wealthy. But yeah, I think we owe it to the public to be transparent about where our interests are, what we're investing in, and we also, in our campaigns, have to disclose where all of our finances come from. So I do think that the laws are written to make us be transparent, but I support restricting individual trades, especially when a member of Congress is on a committee that has jurisdiction over a company that's impacted by the work they do, because whether they're doing something that's exactly what the public should do, I think we have a heightened level of accountability to the public, and I support that.
Ms. Malloy, this question goes to you, and this will be a 30-second answer I'll be asking for. Do you support term limits for members of Congress, and how long do you plan to serve if you are reelected?
Well, I am not even through my first year, so let's not talk about my end date just yet. I haven't signed any of the term limit pledges. I'm not opposed to term limits, but there's a conversation that needs to be had about what they should look like. The good news is that the average tenure of a House member is about 8 years, and Utah has only ever had one senator get a 4th term. So we do a better job than we give ourselves credit for. And the question is, would we be better if we had limits and we knew people had to leave at a certain time? I don't know.
Mr. Woodward?
I'm firmly in the boat that we need term limits for all those offices. For Congress, I personally, I don't imagine spending more than 3 terms, 3 terms, so 6 years there would be appealing to anyone. I don't understand why that sounds fun. But I plan on, if elected, spending up to 3 terms and then going back home and doing the job I worked my whole life to do. I took the bar exam. I am not going to take that lightly. That trauma is going to stick with me the rest of my life, and I'm going to do this job. Now, Congress is not a job. Politics should not be a job, and any person who's made it their career should be thrown out of office immediately.
Time's up. Thank you. This question is going to go to you first, but it comes from one of our viewers who sent it in via the Utah Debate Commission website. So Utah's Millard County, this is from Christine Wells, in the 2nd District, is emerging as a major source for geothermal energy production in the U.S. How might Congress further incentivize this non-carbon producing energy source in Utah and beyond?
An area that I really agree with Governor Spencer Cox on is that we need an all-of-the-above energy policy. We need to be looking at all of the resources and how to do them the best we possibly can. Now, I'm from Carbon County. You should be no surprise on where my sentiments lie about coal-fired power plants. One power plant job equates to 7 to 10 support jobs in the area. That is an enormous burden if you're going to close one plant. you're going to destroy an entire culture, an entire community with that decision. So when we have options like geothermal, I am excited because our power needs are going to grow exponentially in the very near future with how rapid AI is coming about. And if we want to keep affordable energy in our homes, we have to invest heavily in these sources. Geothermal is incredible. And what they're doing over in Miller County from Delta all the way across is going to be so important in the future that the technology alone is going to benefit everyone.
Ms. Malloy.
We need an all-of-the-above energy policy, and we've been producing geothermal energy in Beaver County for a lot of years, and I have supported government investment in the research into how to produce geothermal energy in areas that we used to think weren't hot enough. So I think the appropriate role of the government here is to invest in the research, and then private companies can go out and develop the power plants. And we're doing that in Utah. I'm proud that we're doing that in Utah. In fact, I've brought other members of Congress here to see how we're doing that in Utah because it's clean, renewable energy, and we have the resources for it.
All right. We are going to go through a series of questions now that I think are important, even though they're also kind of fun. And so I'm going to give you 15 seconds to answer these. If you need a little more time, that's okay, but you'll get the picture. And so, Ms. Malloy, this first one goes to you. Can you tell us about a member of the opposite political party, so a Democrat, currently active in politics, who you like and respect?
Yeah, Mary Peltola, who represents Alaska, has an office just around the corner from mine, and she deals with a lot of the same natural resources issues that we deal with in Utah, and she fights against a lot of the same red tape bureaucracy issues that we fight against, and she's co-sponsored some of my bills that would address that problem. So I respect her for that.
Great. And same question to you, Mr. Woodward. Is there a Republican who you really like and respect?
Absolutely. I'm going to go up to Alaska as well with Senator Lisa Murkowski, a fellow alumni of my law school, Willamette University. I went to law school there with her son, Nick. She has been an inspiration to me as long as I've known her son, at least. She has shown integrity, and she has shown passion, she's shown compassion, and she stood against her own party when it was very unpopular to do so, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for her.
Okay. Now, a very tough question. It's going to start with you, Mr. Woodward. What's a hidden gem within Utah's 2nd District? What's a place you really love in this district?
There is a mountain I'm going to keep somewhat secret near Beaver that has one of the coolest gemstones you will ever find. It's the Utah State Gemstone, and it's called Red Beryl. And that is just a small indicator of the greater treasure of our state, which is our natural resources. And as a rock hound, I am a huge fan of that mountain, and also a few things west of Delta where you can go find some trilobites.
All right. And Ms. Malloy?
I have a Red Beryl in my office, but I was going to say Crystal Ball Cave in Miller County. It's a drive to get there. I think it's an undiscovered gem. I've been there, and it's beautiful. Most people don't know it exists.
Great. I just spent a couple days camping in the Wawa Mountains, which were wonderful. So next question, this starts with you, Ms. Malloy. Tell us, I'm going to give you 30 seconds on this one because it's a little bit more involved. Tell us about a time you changed your mind about a significant issue.
Well, one that comes to mind because you just asked me about it is term limits. I used to be all in favor of term limits until I started working in policy, and I realized that term limiting members of Congress who are accountable to the public might only strengthen the staff and lobbyists and other career people in Washington who are not accountable to the public. So I went from being very pro-term limit to willing to explore term limits because I learned something that changed my mind about what I thought I knew was true.
Mr. Woodward, when have you changed your mind?
Most significantly, it came to nuclear energy. I was very hesitant, very afraid of the concept of converting our coal-fired plants to small-cell nuclear plants. Then I was able to tour the San Rafael Energy Research Center, which has recently changed its name, which I'm not going to learn. But the scientists there explained to me the process of how these reactors work, and they educated me on the technology, and it inspired me. And I didn't just realize I was incorrect, it made me an advocate for the entire sector.
Okay, this question is going to go to you, also 30 seconds. What is a job you had when you were younger that taught you something important, and what did it teach you?
When I was 12 years old, I got hired to be a volunteer tour guide at the College of Eastern Utah Prehistoric Museum, which is the greatest dinosaur museum in the entire world, at a time where we had just discovered the Utah raptor. And I remember being so excited to be able to take these people through the geological history of my hometown. And my first tour I ever gave was to this Polish couple touring the Western United States. And the excitement in their eyes the entire time reminded me, or taught me at 12 years old, that I could be older and still have that same passion for things. It was an amazing thing to see.
All right, and Ms. Malloy, a job you had when you were younger, and what did it teach you?
Well, I started working for the USDA when I was an undergrad at SUU, and then I continued that job when I graduated and moved to Beaver. And that's where I learned how important federal policy is and the impact it has with people on the ground, and why it's important to get involved and be willing to learn policy and change policy, and that led me to be here tonight.
All right. And this next question is going to be just 10-second responses because we're just about to closing statements. Ms. Malloy, this goes to you. I want you to recommend a book and tell us why.
So one of my favorite books that I try to read at least once a year is Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute. And I think everybody should learn some leadership skills.
All right. Mr. Woodward.
One of the most recent books I've read that is stuck with me as I've been driving across the state campaigning this year is Helmet for My Pillow by Bob Leckie. It's a World War II memoir from the Pacific that has stayed with me deeply, that I would recommend everyone read.
That was kind of cruel for me to ask you to describe a book in 10 seconds, but you did very well. Thank you for that. Now, we've reached the end of the debate. A random drawing held earlier determined that the first closing statement goes to Ms. Malloy.
Thank you. I am the 2nd District. I don't know how many times I've said that in the last 18 months, but I have spent my adult life in Cedar, Beaver, St. George, working for the people of the 2nd District and trying to make life better for the people of the 2nd District. And I just feel like I have to point out before this is over that the Applebee's in Cedar is at least in the 2nd District. Carbon and Emery counties are not. I have been out on dirt roads with you. I've gotten my hands dirty with you. I have fought for you for better than a decade. And this is a continuation of the same dedication to the people and the issues in the 2nd District. I hope you have seen in the short time I've had in Congress that I am willing to work long hours, to put in hard days, showing up for you, making sure you feel heard and represented on the federal level. And that is the only reason to run for Congress. I'm not here because I think being in Congress is cool. It is a lot of hard work. But every time I can solve a problem for someone in the 2nd District, it's all worth it. And I would appreciate your vote.
All right, Mr. Woodward.
154 years ago, James Woodward led the wagon train down Huntington Canyon to Orangeville to settle my valley. Since that time, there's been a Woodward there, nonstop. A year and a half ago, I was sitting in my office in downtown Portland, realizing my father was the last one. And I knew responsibility was calling me to come home. My county, my town, my valley was fading from existence due to the overregulation and underregulation put on by both parties. On my own account, my Democrats, who passed environmental regulations that make sense in San Francisco, but do not make sense in Castle Dale. And the Republicans who said, climate change isn't happening, this isn't happening at all, and they spent years burying their heads in the sand. I came home to fight for rural Utah because I am rural Utah. I've spent more time on dirt roads and in the wilderness in this state than every other federal candidate in this election cycle combined. I am of this place, and I've come back to fight, and I'm not going anywhere.
All right, thank you to both of you, and thank you for participating and for both of your dedication to public service. Election Day is Tuesday, November 5th. Contact your county clerk if you have any questions about making your vote count in this election. We greatly appreciate Utah Tech University for donating the Eccles Fine Arts Center for this debate. We're also grateful for the Larry H. and Gail Miller Family Foundation, Zions Bank, and the George S. and Dolores Dory Eccles Foundation for their generous support of the Utah Debate Commission. This debate and others from previous years are available online at utahdebatecommission.org. I'm Max Roth. Thank you and good night.